So today I want to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is leadership. And I've spent much of my career dealing with leadership. My PhD is in organizational leadership. I've built multiple programs, academic, a master's, a minor. I'm working on creating a bachelor's in leadership, nearly completed with that. And I want to look at three very different leaders. We're going to look at Zelenskyy, we're going to look at Putin, and then we're going to look at a combat commander, and I'll show you some video about that. Um, as I'm talking about this, if you want to look back before the war started, this is what I was doing. I was doing leadership-ishy kind of videos and just talking about that. And then the war hit, and I just started talking about Zelenskyy and what was going on in Ukraine, and I didn't want to talk about anything else. And eventually, I just kind of stopped what I was doing over here, and I went over to this channel. And like last night, I'm at the fireworks, and I've created this.
So while you're watching the fireworks, remember in Ukraine, the bombs are real. Please pray for the people of Ukraine.
Right? Because that's what's on my heart. That's what I really care about. And so I saw this video of Zelensky's, and we're going to watch this together. I want to compare notes between him and Putin, and then we're going to compare notes between that and what we see on the front line. So this was Zelensky's speech about the 4th of July, and he really hit some extraordinarily high notes. He's a great communicator. He's been a great communicator, but just watch.
Dear Americans, I congratulate you on the best day that life can bestow on any nation that rose up for freedom. I congratulate you on your Independence Day. Only the brave gain independence, and only the best of the brave are able to pass the freedom from generation to generation.
Now, I said something very important here. One, about passing from generation to generation, because you're only a generation away from not being free, from losing your freedom, and that's important. But notice how he's tying what's going on in Ukraine to the 4th of July in the United States, our Independence Day.
To pass it by expanding its limits, the limits of how each person's life, each community, and the entire country are protected. And to pass it by growing hope. Hope for others on earth, that they too will be able to become free, and that their freedom will also become a precious legacy for their children and grandchildren.
Yeah, that hope, that vision, that's what we're going to achieve has to be there, or you're never going to get anywhere near it.
For almost 2.5 centuries, America has been the land of the free and the home of the brave, attracting people from all over the world who are looking for more and striving for the better. And although there is no path without mistakes, the USA gave and still give a powerful dream that where the darkness of lawlessness now reigns, freedom will one day shine.
Yeah, so as imperfect as the United States is, people aren't exactly, trying to invade Belarus for a better life, right?
It is an honor for us to be an ally of such dream, such courage, and such freedom. Dear Americans, Ukrainian bravery masters American weapons and secures democracy, which we value equally. Ukrainian love of freedom, with your support, has...
Okay, let me go back to that last point with Ukrainian democracy. Zelenskyy has done an amazing job that in wartime, still trying to maintain a democratic state. He could have gone down a different path and locked down into complete martial law and become very autocratic, and he has avoided that. And in avoiding that, he has won the affection of his Western supporters.
Ignited a new powerful flame of liberty in our part of Europe, which will not go out and will ensure that tyranny will never again pass through Europe. And therefore, Europe will not need your soldiers' participation in bloody battle for freedom.
Now he's been making this kind of speech since almost the very beginning. His speech is essentially the fight is here, but this fight is your fight as well. It's fighting here so it doesn't come to you, and it's really remarkable how well he's tied that together. And I don't think he's wrong. I think if you don't check Putin here, it expands. So he's right.
And the Ukrainian dream of living freely, when it is crowned with victory in the brutal and unprovoked war unleashed by Russia, will give fresh energy to the American leadership. The world clearly sees now the one who stands with Ukraine stands for freedom.
That's right.
And after our victory, the world will be convinced again the one who values freedom always wins.
Okay, so that the one who stands with freedom stands with Ukraine, right? So that's what's so perplexing about people who are, Americans who are patriots who are then repeating Russian lines. It's mind blowing. Okay.
4th of July, America. And please remember that in the coalition of the free and the brave, you can always count on Ukraine as your ally.
And I believe
Slava Ukraine.
I believe that that's true going forward. That we will always be able to count on Ukraine. We have a new best friend in Eastern Europe. In the same way that whenever I meet a Kuwaiti, someone from the country of Kuwait, they love America. Like it's just like like I didn't do anything, but you're American. It's really amazing. Okay, so let's look at this. Remember what happened in the first day. So that's him talking on the 4th of July. Here's Zelenskyy. Let's take a trip down memory lane to the first or second day of the war.
Всім доброго ранку,
Good
українці.
morning.
Зараз
There's a
в
lot of
мережі дуже
fakes,
багато
information
фейкової
online.
інформації, що, немов я закликаю складати зброю.
That I call our
Нашу
army to
армію
put down
іде
arms.
евакуація. Значить так, я тут, ніякої зброї ми не
That there is an
складемо,
evacuation
будемо
going
захищати
on.
нашу державу, тому що наша зброя – це
So
наша
here's the
правда,
thing.
наша
I
правда,
am here.
тому що це наша
We won't put
земля,
down weapons.
наша
We'll
країна,
protect our
наші
country.
діти, і ми все це будемо
Because our weapon
захищати.
is truth, and our land is our country, and our
Все.
children, and we will defend all of
Те,
it.
що я
That's
хотів
it.
вам сказати.
That's what I want to tell you.
Слава
Glory to Ukraine. Now, that took some guts to say, I'm staying right here. In other news, we see this exclusive: Putin fled Moscow during Prigozhin's mutiny, and this just came out and it was talking about some of the background. Now, we knew that, we saw this in reports, but yeah, he fled from what? Not from the mighty Russian army, which was coming at him at all sides, but from Prigozhin. Now, Putin is in this odd place where he's picking up the pieces, trying to look like he's tough again, where he really was caught off guard and wasn't very tough. So he's talking to the Asian nations, the CSO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, or SCO, I'm sorry, I mispronounced that. The Russian people are consolidated as never before, he tells them. Well, yeah, kind of, but that's not necessarily a good thing. When you come together because of a threat, that's not the same thing as just being united in general. Russian political circles and the whole of society clearly demonstrated their unity and elevated sense of responsibility for the fate of the fatherland when they responded as a united front against the attempted armed mutiny. Again, just because you did that in the face of threat, when you're circling the wagons because you have to, that's not because you're strong. That's because you're trying to make yourself stronger so that you're being able to defend yourself. So that's what's going on there. Now, when we're thinking about Putin, there's this really interesting article that came out. This was the former, Michael McFaul is he's a professor at Stanford now. He was the U.S. ambassador to Russia from 2012 to 2014. And this article, I'm going to read some passages, but don't go away. Don't be intimidated by that. This is really, really important stuff. So the interviewer says, what have we learned about Putin and Russia in the wake of Prigozhin's short-lived rebellion? And he says, if you think about Putin's strength within his country and his military and his commanders a week ago versus now, he's emerged from the crisis in a much weaker position. Anytime there's a mutiny against you or anytime there's a specter of civil war, that was his phrase, not mine. That suggested you're not fully in control. Now remember, he was the U.S. ambassador to Russia for 2012 to 2014. So he knows what he's talking about here. Okay? And then finally, two other lessons I think are important, one relating to the war in Ukraine and one related to the ongoing instability in Russia. When the mutiny was underway and it went very smoothly and it made it very easy for Rostov and on the road to Moscow, Putin made a very dramatic speech. I listened to it in real time, and I've listened to it several times since, where he called people traitors and said they're going to use all the means necessary to quash this mutiny, this rebellion, is the word he used. And yet, when push came to shove, he didn't do that. He didn't escalate. He didn't double down. He didn't use the massive military force he negotiated with these traitors. That's right. And I saw this and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Why isn't he just like bringing the hammer down? Because now anybody else who's thinking about rising against him is going to think, well, maybe I'll get away with it too. But his assumption about the war in Ukraine is always that Putin is this tough guy and that he will escalate if you do too much. Like, that's our assumption, and he's been able to use that to his advantage to keep us from providing this weapon or that weapon, or don't cross this red line, we're going to nuke you, right? If we send him tanks, he's going to escalate. If we send him Patriots, air defense, he's going to escalate. If we send him jet fighters, he's going to escalate. And now you hear that we don't want to send certain long-range missiles, attack them, because Putin will escalate. Well, this assumption is that he's going to escalate. Well, maybe he'll capitulate. Maybe he'll negotiate when faced with the specter of losing the war in Ukraine. So I think that's really an important lesson from that first speech. Okay? He wants to project that he's this, but he's really that. That's what we're saying. And then the other lesson, the second speech, is that he hasn't yet figured out how to deal with Wagner. Now that's really interesting. He doesn't even know what he's doing with Wagner. That's so strange if you think about it. A national address, and the only audience that he's talking to are these hired guns, and his main message was, your leaders betrayed you, they deceived you, split with them and come with me. And there weren't many Wagner fighters that took the offer. That is really strange. It makes him look even more weak. Okay, now he shifts gears a little bit because the person interviewing says this. You write in your memoirs that so long as Putin rules Russia, strategic partnership was impossible. Okay, that's fair. Could it be that your problem is with Russia and not merely Putin? Now, we've talked about this on this channel where, like, there's something culturally about Russia that has this imperialistic vibe. And I don't know that if you just get rid of Putin that you're going to have clear sailing, because you could have another Putin-like. It could be the same. It could be a little less. It could be worse. But he addresses something that made me rethink my own position. And that's why I'm showing you this now, because it jives with everything I understand about leadership. Just watch. Okay? It's a very complex question, and I don't want to cartoonize it. I do not believe that countries act the same way, over centuries because of history and culture. Now, there is something to that, but not when you get granular. Okay, that's a very legitimate debate in academia. Are there structural forces that cause countries to behave in a way, or do individuals matter? I think that individuals matter, and the regime type matters. There's something very true here. Leadership matters. Right? And the Leadership Institute talks about how, personnel is policy. There's something to that. The person that you put into that office is going to shift how things are done, as opposed, if you put this person in as opposed to that person. It's not just the long continuity of the culture. Certainly that has an effect, but that's not all of it. He said, I think individuals matter and regime type matters. And I think that autocracies behave in the world in one way and democracies behave in the world in a different way. Certainly, all those things are true. Democracies don't tend to do what autocracies do. Okay, I've changed my view since writing that book. So when it comes over the last 30 years, I do not see continuity in the way that Russia has behaved to the outside world. There was not continuity between Soviet leader from 1964 to 1982 in Brezhnev and Soviet leader 1985 to 91 Gorbachev, just to be very clear. The way Brezhnev dealt with the uprisings in Eastern Europe, he invaded in 68. When Gorbachev was faced with the similar choices in 89, he said, go your own way. If Russia as a country and Russians behave the same way all the time, we should have expected Gorbachev should have invaded Germany when there were uprisings in 89, and he didn't. That's really interesting. But the idea that Soviet Union behaved in the same way under Gorbachev as it did under Brezhnev, let alone Khrushchev or Stalin, I just think the evidence is so overwhelmingly obvious that the argument is not very compelling to me. He's right. They behave differently under different leaders. Yeltsin didn't behave the same way after the 1993 constitutional crisis as Putin is behaving today. And to speed things up, remember Putin was a completely accidental leader of Russia. There was no groundswell of support. Like there was no popular democratic uprising for him. There was no Putin movement in 1999 and 2000. He was a creature of the existing regime. He wasn't an opposition leader, and he wasn't with the communists or with the right-wing populists. Yeltsin appointed Putin prime minister, and then Yeltsin appointed him as acting president. And he wants to create this myth that there was the chaos of the 90s and I came in as a hero. And that's complete and utter nonsense. That's right. He wants to rewrite that and make it look like he was like this grand champion coming in, riding in on the white horse to save Russia. And what if Yeltsin had chosen somebody else? In fact, he wanted to choose somebody else. His name was Boris Nemtsov. Nemtsov was the heir apparent, and then something interrupted that plan. It was the August 1998 financial crash when the government at the time had then to be thrown out, which Nemtsov was in because Russia was still quasi-democracy. But there's no doubt in my mind that the history of Russian relations with Georgia and Ukraine and my country would have been radically different had Boris Nemtsov been elected president. Now that's a really interesting thought. I'm not going to go into the rest of the article here, but it's really, really interesting how much leadership matters. And to show you a little bit more about how much leadership matters, I want you to watch this. This was just a few days ago on reporting from Ukraine, and we're seeing some minor battlefield successes here. But here's what's going on. I just want you to play this and hear what's going on. And if you have not watched reporting from Ukraine before, they do a very, very good job in just a few minutes capturing the essence of the highlights for the day. So you should watch reporting from Ukraine if you don't regularly do so. Okay, so here is, let's start at about 2.5 minutes, almost 3 minutes here. Let's go just a little bit further back. There we go. So let's hear what he has to say.
Unable to move forward, the Ukrainian assault unit was forced to conduct defensive operations. After sunset, the situation did not improve, gunfire and artillery strikes intensified, and it became clear that Russians were preparing for a night assault. Ukrainians were not ready for a defensive operation. The commander faced his soldiers and said, "If we stay here, we die, which is not an option. So we either have to retreat and lose what we gained today, or eliminate the threat. The offense is the best defense, so we open fire and use everything we have, while two groups of 2 people leverage our strong right flank and crawl right into the Russian positions. When they are ready, I give a signal, we throw grenades, and immediately after the explosion enter the trenches and take the positions. I'm going to be one of these 4 people. I need 3 volunteers. Who will
You hear that? He said, we got to go do this. This is the hardest thing possible. I'm going to be one of I need 4 volunteers. I'm going to be one of them. Who's coming with me? That's leadership. Not fleeing from Moscow when Wagner's coming. Leadership is staying in Kyiv when the Russians are coming, or what this guy's doing.
with me? Everyone was silent. The idea of crawling into the dark towards enemy positions under constant machine gun and artillery fire and successfully ambushing Russians with just 4 people seemed insane. However, the fact that their commander was willing to go first and lead them gave them the confidence that they would succeed.
It's leadership by example.
Advanced and assumed the necessary positions, with Russians still unaware of their presence. The commander gave the sign, grenades exploded, and the whole hell broke loose. In the morning, the commander reported that the operation was successful, Ukrainians wrecked Russian plans, and took the positions that they initially planned to take. By the way, the commander that led his troops into battle that night is Valery Markus, who is actually the commander of the 47th Mechanized Brigade. Despite such a high position, he participates in the most difficult operation and understands exactly.
This wasn't a team leader or a squad leader or a platoon leader. He was the commander of the brigade, leading by example. This is one of the reasons that I have very high hopes for the Ukrainians, because I see this kind of leadership demonstrated, and I see on the other side, hey, you go up there and do that thing and don't come back or we'll shoot you. Now I'm being a little overly facetious, but that's really, they're not leading in the same way, and so this is a very positive sign.
Exactly what his troops are dealing with. Despite visible exhaustion on his face, He said that they were already set to storm the next Russian positions on the line. 36 hours of continuous assaults under his command proved to be extremely successful, and his unit cleared multiple kilometers of tree lines and opened action.
Okay, so you're getting a sense of what's going on. That's leadership. Okay, that's all I wanted to communicate to you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the likes. If you like this, please share it. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for the coffees. Thank you for listening to me this long when you didn't have to, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine. I'll be back tomorrow, and I hope you will be too.